Femi, I hope we won't stop doing this. I can't believe that we are doing the same thing our mum and dad are always doing at night. I love it and I am enjoying it, but at the same time I am afraid that we might get caught one day. Amina said, lying close to Femi in bed. Don't worry, sweetheart, as usual when they are out to work, we will. Femi assured Amina. In the village of Odan, life moved slowly. The sun set every evening behind distant hills, casting a warm, golden light over the fields. It was a peaceful place, with people going about their days, and everyone knew everyone's name. But for two teenagers, Femi and Amina, the village felt strangely empty at times. Their parents, hard-working and always occupied with their jobs, often left them home alone, with nothing to do but wait for their return. Femi and Amina had been neighbors since they were toddlers. They'd grown up together, playing in the dirt, climbing trees, and running around the village fields. Even though they were only 16 years old, their bond was strong. They had seen each other through the growing pains of childhood and were each other's constant companion. They were never truly alone when they had each other. Femi lived in a small, neat house with his father, a farmer, and his mother, who worked at the local market. Amina, on the other hand, lived with her mother, a seamstress, and her father, who worked away in the city as a mechanic. While Femi's parents were often home to offer a kind word, Amina's parents were frequently gone, leaving her to navigate life with just the occasional letter or phone call. One warm afternoon, Femi was sitting in his backyard, his feet dangling over the edge of a wooden bench. He had finished his chores early and now found himself wondering what to do with the rest of his day. His gaze shifted to the house next door, where Amina's laughter floated through the air. He stood up and walked toward her house without a second thought. Amina was sitting on her porch, her legs tucked under her, humming a soft tune as she braided a piece of string through her fingers. When she saw Femi approaching, she smiled, that warm, familiar smile that always made him feel at home. She didn't need to ask why he was there, he had always been welcome. Hey, Femi. What's up? Amina greeted him, pushing aside the braided string and patting the spot next to her on the porch. It's a perfect day, don't you think? Femi sat down beside her, the two of them looking out at the village. The sky was clear, and the air was warm but not too hot. It was the kind of day that made everything feel calm and carefree. Yeah, Femi replied, glancing at her with a slight smirk. But I've got nothing to do. No chores left, no one to talk to. Thought I'd come hang out with you. Amina laughed. You're always welcome here. My parents aren't home, so it's just me. Femi leaned back, his head resting on the wooden railing behind them. Mine, too. They are probably off working like always. The two teens sat in comfortable silence for a while, enjoying the peace that settled over them. It was moments like these that made them appreciate their friendship. With their parents gone, there was nothing to worry about, just the simple pleasure of spending time together. Amina broke the silence first. You know, it feels like we are the only ones left in this village sometimes. Femi looked at her, a faint hint of curiosity in his eyes. What do you mean? She shrugged, staring ahead at the dirt road leading out of the village. It's like everyone has their own life, parents with their work, people in the market, everyone's busy with something. But it's always just us, right? When our parents are gone, it's like we are on our own. Femi nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. Yeah. Sometimes it feels like we are the only ones who don't have something to do. But when I'm with you, it doesn't feel so bad. Amina smiled at him, her eyes lighting up. I feel the same way. Over the next few weeks, their bond grew stronger. With their parents still away, Femi and Amina spent every free moment together. They explored the village, wandered through the fields, and even ventured into the nearby woods, where they would sit for hours and talk about their dreams, their fears, and everything in between. They talked about the future, too. Amina dreamt of one day leaving the village to see the world beyond the hills, while Femi was content with the idea of working the land and staying close to home. They teased each other, shared secrets, and built a friendship that felt like it would never end. One evening, as the sun began to set and the sky was painted with hues of pink and orange, Femi and Amina sat on the porch of her house again. This time, they had a basket of freshly baked bread between them, savoring the simple pleasure of a shared meal. Do you think we'll always be friends? Amina asked suddenly, her voice soft and uncertain. Femi glanced at her, surprised by the question. He hadn't really thought about it before. I hope so. Why wouldn't we be? She looked down at her hands, a faint blush creeping up her cheeks. I don't know. I just feel like I don't want anything to change. Femi smiled, his heart warm at her words. Nothing will change, Amina. We've known each other forever. No matter what happens, we'll always have each other. Amina's smile widened, and for a brief moment, the world seemed perfect, like nothing could ever come between them. They sat together, the warmth of the setting sun lingering on their skin, and promised each other that their friendship would last forever. But little did they know, the bond they had formed would soon be tested in ways they never imagined. As the days passed, the once innocent companionship between Femi and Amina began to shift. What had started as carefree adventures and simple conversations began to feel like an unspoken dependence. Their time together became their refuge, the only thing that truly made them feel alive in the absence of their busy parents. Femi and Amina's relationship grew more complex with each passing day. The boundaries between friendship and something more began to blur, though neither of them fully understood the extent of the changes they were undergoing. They had always been close, but now it felt as if they needed each other more than ever. Their once easy friendship now carried an invisible weight, one they didn't quite know how to handle. Every afternoon, after their chores were done, they would meet in Amina's backyard, just as they had in the past. However, instead of the playful teasing and innocent talk they used to share, their conversations took on a deeper, darker tone. One evening, Femi showed up at Amina's house later than usual. He had been thinking about her all day, about the way her smile made him feel, about the way her laugh echoed in his mind. When he reached the backyard, Amina was sitting against the old oak tree, her face turned to the sky, her eyes distant. She looked like she was lost in thought, but when she saw him, she quickly smiled. Hey, she said, her voice soft, almost too soft. You're late. Yeah, Femi replied, scratching the back of his head. I had some things on my mind. Amina nodded knowingly, patting the ground beside her. Femi sat down next to her, and they sat in silence for a while, the quiet stretching out between them. A slight tension lingered in the air, an undercurrent neither of them was willing to acknowledge. What's going on, Femi? Amina finally asked, her voice still gentle but full of concern. You've been distant lately. Femi hesitated before responding, unsure of how to put his feelings into words. I don't know. I just feel like everything's changing. It's like I'm not sure where I fit in anymore. Amina turned to face him, her eyes soft with empathy. You fit here. With me. The simple words hit Femi in a way he hadn't expected. He looked at Amina, noticing how the evening light caught her features, making her look almost ethereal. There was something in her eyes, something that made him feel both comforted and uneasy at the same time. He didn't know how to explain the mix of emotions inside him. You mean a lot to me, Amina, he said quietly, his voice heavy with emotion. I don't know what I would do without you. Amina smiled, but it wasn't the carefree smile he was used to. There was something more in it, something almost knowing, like she had been waiting for him to say it. I feel the same way, Femi, she said softly, her voice barely a whisper. It's like we are the only two people who really understand each other. That night, for the first time, their closeness began to feel like something more than just friendship. It wasn't a romantic gesture, but something about the way they looked at each other felt different. Femi didn't fully realize it yet, but something had shifted between them. They were no longer two teens just passing the time together, they were two people who had begun to depend on each other in ways they hadn't expected. In the days that followed, their relationship continued to deepen, but it also grew more complicated. They began to rely on each other emotionally more than ever before. Every conversation seemed to linger longer, and every interaction felt charged with a sense of unspoken understanding. They began sharing things with each other that no one else could know, like their fears, their dreams, and the secrets they hadn't told anyone. But their friendship also began to take on a darker side. It wasn't long before they started making reckless decisions together. Little things at first, sneaking out after dark to meet by the river, staying out later than they should, telling lies to cover up their whereabouts. The thrill of breaking the rules brought them closer, and with every small rebellion, they felt a rush of excitement that they couldn't deny. But deep down, there was a growing sense of unease, a feeling that they were pushing boundaries they shouldn't cross. One evening, after their parents had gone for another long shift, Femi and Amina found themselves alone again, this time in the small woods outside the village. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and the fading glow of the setting sun. They had snuck away from their homes, just like they had done many times before, but this time, there was an edge to their actions. "Amina, what if we get caught?" Femi asked, his voice a mix of nervousness and excitement. "What if they find out what we've been doing?" Amina looked at him, her face serious. "Then we'll deal with it." "But it's worth it, Femi. Isn't it?" Femi wasn't sure. There was something unsettling about the way she said it, almost as if she was testing him. But in that moment, he couldn't bring himself to say no. Instead, he took her hand and they continued down the narrow path, as if nothing could stop them. As the days passed, their reckless behavior grew more frequent. They would sneak off together, doing things they knew they shouldn't, lying to their parents, taking risks, and becoming more distant from the world around them. The bond they shared was powerful, but it was also slowly becoming a cage. One evening, Femi found himself alone in his room, thinking about Amina. He had never felt this way before. It wasn't just friendship anymore, it was something stronger, something he wasn't sure he could control. His feelings for Amina were no longer just about companionship, they were about needing her, wanting her presence to fill the emptiness that he didn't know how to express. Later, as they sat on Amina's porch once again, a sudden tension filled the air. Neither of them spoke for a long time. It was as though both were afraid to acknowledge what was happening between them. The connection that had once felt so light-hearted now carried an unspoken weight, and the uncertainty of it all hung between them like a storm waiting to break. "I don't want things to change, Femi," Amina said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not like this." Femi looked at her, his heart heavy with emotion. "I don't either, Amina. But I don't know if we can keep doing this." The words hung in the air, unspoken yet loud, both of them knowing that the course they were on was dangerous. They had become so entwined with each other that they couldn't see the potential consequences of their actions. The boundaries they were pushing were ones they would soon regret. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the world in twilight, Femi and Amina sat there in silence, unsure of how to move forward. They had become too dependent on each other to simply walk away, but neither knew how much further they could go before they lost everything. The storm came suddenly, without warning, just as the sun began to dip below the horizon. The air, thick with the scent of rain, felt heavy with anticipation. Femi and Amina had spent the day together, as they often did, sneaking away from their homes under the pretense of nothing and wandering through the woods behind Amina's house. Their usual carefree moments had begun to feel different, there was an intensity to the way they looked at each other, a pressure that neither could explain. That evening, as the first thunderclap rattled through the sky, the wind began to pick up, and rain began to fall in heavy sheets. The sound of the storm grew louder, drowning out the familiar, comfortable silence that had once defined their time together. They found shelter under a small, overgrown porch at the edge of the woods, huddling close to each other for warmth. Amina shivered, pulling her jacket tighter around her, though it did little to shield her from the cold. "We should probably go inside," she said, her voice tinged with uncertainty. But even as the storm raged around them, there was something magnetic about being with Femi. The way he looked at her, the way their bodies were pressed together, it made her feel alive, but also nervous. Femi glanced at her, his expression unreadable. He had been feeling the same thing, an overwhelming sense of dependence and a confusing mixture of emotions that he couldn't place. There was a strange comfort in being so close to Amina, but also an intense feeling of fear. Fear of what they were becoming, fear of the truth they were both avoiding. "Amina, what if we get caught?" Femi asked, his voice filled with a quiet tension. "What if someone finds out what we've been doing? It's getting out of control." Amina didn't respond immediately. She stared ahead, her thoughts clearly racing. The fear in Femi's voice mirrored her own, but there was also something inside her that couldn't resist what was happening between them. The excitement, the thrill of breaking the rules, it was all too intoxicating. She had never felt so free, so alive. "We'll deal with it," she finally replied, her voice low and filled with an edge of defiance. "It's worth it." This feels right, Femi. Doesn't it? Femi hesitated, unsure how to respond. Part of him felt the same way. This dangerous pull toward Amina was undeniable. But the other part of him was terrified of the consequences. He knew that the way they were going couldn't continue forever. Eventually, someone would notice. Someone would find out. And when they did, nothing would be the same. The storm outside seemed to grow louder as they sat there, a deafening roar in the distance. The rain fell in torrents, drenching everything in its path, but neither of them made a move to leave. It felt as though the world around them had disappeared, leaving just the two of them alone in a bubble of confusion and emotion. But that moment, one they would both look back on with regret, would not last. As they sat there, their bodies close but their minds conflicted, something changed. Amina's hand brushed against Femi's and the touch felt electric. It was the moment that broke the last of the barriers between them. Without thinking, Femi leaned in, his lips meeting hers in a kiss that was desperate, messy, and full of everything they had been feeling for months. For a moment, neither of them pulled away. The kiss was everything, confusing, dangerous, and, at that moment, exactly what they both thought they needed. But as quickly as it had started, the kiss broke, and the reality of what they had just done hit them both like a wave. Amina. What did we just do? Femi whispered, his voice shaking with fear. Amina pulled away, her face pale in the dim light. I don't know. But it felt right, didn't it? The storm outside continued to rage, but the storm inside them was just beginning. They had crossed a line, one they could never uncross. The kiss, the closeness, the secrets, they were all part of something much darker than either of them had anticipated. And it wasn't just the storm outside that was out of control, it was their lives, their bond, and the lies they would have to tell to cover it up. As they returned to Amina's house that evening, soaked to the bone, both of them remained quiet. The tension between them had shifted from a shared connection to something heavier, something that neither of them knew how to handle. They had gone too far to turn back now, but neither knew what would happen next. In the days that followed, their relationship became more strained. They avoided each other at times, unsure how to act after what had happened. Femi began to pull away emotionally, realizing that the connection they shared was no longer healthy. But Amina, desperate for reassurance, sought out his presence more than ever. She wanted to keep what they had, she didn't want it to end, even though deep down, she knew the consequences would be too great. Their once effortless friendship had now become a ticking time bomb, with both of them uncertain of when it would explode. One day, when their parents were both away, Femi and Amina met up once again. This time, the weight of their actions hung between them like a thick fog. They didn't speak of the kiss, didn't mention the way things had changed. But the tension was undeniable. And that afternoon, as they sat together in the quiet of the house, Amina reached for Femi's hand again. This time, he didn't pull away. But there was something different. Something broken. Amina, I don't think we can keep doing this, Femi said, his voice thick with the emotions he had been holding back. This isn't right. We are hurting each other. Amina didn't look at him at first, her face turned away as she fought to hold back tears. I don't care, Femi. I don't care if it's wrong. I need you. You're the only person who understands me. Femi wanted to comfort her, to tell her that everything would be okay. But deep down, he knew that they were too far gone. They had crossed a line, and there was no going back. The bond they shared was no longer one of innocence, it was one built on secrets, lies, and a dangerous dependence that neither of them knew how to escape. As the storm that had marked the beginning of their darkest moment cleared, they sat in silence, both realizing that their relationship had reached the point of no return. They had become something neither of them could control. And with that realization, everything changed. The storm had passed, but the consequences of Femi and Amina's actions remained, a heavy cloud that neither of them could escape. The air had cleared, but everything else felt thicker, heavier, suffocating them both. The fragile bond they had once shared now seemed irrevocably broken. They had crossed lines they never thought they would, and the truth of what they had done settled between them like a jagged stone lodged deep in their hearts. Femi sat on the edge of Amina's porch the morning after the storm, his fingers gripping the edge of the wooden railing, his thoughts a swirling mess of confusion, guilt, and anger. He didn't know where to begin or how to undo the damage. It wasn't just the kiss, it was everything that had led up to it, every secret, every lie. They had gone too far. He had gone too far. Amina, too, was awake early, staring out the window at the grey sky, lost in thought. She could hear the soft patter of raindrops that had started again, and yet, she didn't feel the familiar comfort she had once found in nature. She had always loved the rain, the quiet stillness it brought, but today it felt like a constant reminder of how far she had fallen. She had wanted to keep what they had, but deep down, she knew that they were no longer just friends. The weight of their shared mistakes now pressed down on her, suffocating her hopes for a future where they could pretend nothing had changed. Femi stood up abruptly and walked toward the small, overgrown path that led to her backyard. He had to see her, to talk to her, even if he didn't know what he could possibly say. It was time for them to face the consequences of their actions, whether they were ready or not. When Amina saw him approaching, she didn't move. She didn't smile. There was no warmth in her expression, no hope in her eyes. Her lips were tight, and she turned her gaze away from him, focusing instead on the rain that had started falling harder. Her heart was heavy, weighed down by the realization that she couldn't hold on to Femi in the same way anymore. "I know we need to talk," Femi said quietly, standing just a few feet away. His voice was strained, filled with the rawness of the emotions he had been holding back for too long. "But I don't know what to say." Amina nodded slowly, her eyes still on the rain. "I don't know what to say either." Her voice cracked as she spoke, and Femi felt a sharp pang of guilt deep in his chest. They stood in silence for what felt like an eternity, neither of them knowing how to bridge the gap that had formed between them. The air felt thick with unspoken words, and neither of them could find the courage to face the reality of what they had done. But it wasn't just about the kiss. It wasn't just about what had happened physically. The truth was, their entire relationship had been built on a foundation of lies and dependence, and they had each become trapped in the cycle they had created. "Amina," Femi said after a long pause, his voice trembling. "We've been lying to each other, haven't we? We've been pretending like this friendship, whatever it is, could keep going like nothing ever changed. But it has. It has changed." Amina turned her gaze toward him then, her eyes soft but filled with pain. "I don't want it to change, Femi," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the sound of the rain. "I don't want to lose you. But I don't know how to fix what we've done." Femi swallowed hard, his throat tight. "I don't know how either. I want things to go back to how they were. But they can't, can they?" "No," Amina replied softly. "We've crossed a line, Femi. I knew we were getting closer, but I never thought it would come to this. I don't know how to be friends with you anymore. Not like this." The words stung, but they were the truth. The bond they shared had become something unhealthy, something neither of them knew how to handle. They had crossed a line, and in doing so, they had opened a door that could never be closed again. Femi wanted to tell her that they could fix it, that they could go back to the way things were, but he knew it was a lie. He had to face the fact that what they had wasn't just a friendship. It was something more dangerous, something that neither of them could control. They had become too dependent on each other, too entangled in their emotions, and now, they were paying the price. Amina wiped away a tear, but it was futile. There were too many tears left to shed. "We can't keep doing this, Femi. We need space. We need time." Femi nodded slowly, his heart aching at the thought of losing her. But he knew she was right. They needed time apart, not just from each other but from everything they had created. They needed to find themselves again, to heal from the damage they had caused each other. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "For everything." Amina didn't respond at first. She just shook her head, as if the apology couldn't undo the hurt they had caused each other. She wasn't sure if she could forgive him, or if she could ever forgive herself. But she also knew that she couldn't stay in this toxic relationship any longer. She needed to let go. "I'm sorry too, Femi," she whispered, her voice breaking. "But we can't fix this. Not now." For a long while, they stood there in silence, the rain falling around them like a quiet chorus of sorrow. They had shared so much, but they had also destroyed so much. The friendship that had once been so simple and pure was now a distant memory, and there was no going back. Later that day, Femi left Amina's house, his heart heavy with the weight of their broken bond. He didn't know what the future held for them, but he knew one thing for sure: whatever it was, they would have to face it apart. As he walked home, he thought about everything that had happened between them, the laughter, the secrets, the lies, and the overwhelming feeling of regret that hung over him like a dark cloud. It was a hard lesson to learn, but he had learned it the hard way. There was no room for unhealthy dependence in any relationship, and sometimes, the best thing you could do for someone you cared about was to let them go. Amina sat alone on her porch long after Femi had gone. She looked out at the rain, her thoughts as tangled as the wet leaves beneath her feet. She had lost something precious, but at least she had learned something too.